And then someone asked me, well, when do you feel free? And it was one of these moments in life where I had this like shockwave come through my body and I could feel something happening. And this idea of freedom being this like fictional destination that is like a one day type of achievement. Like once I have this relationship, once I have this type of job, I'm making this much money, I have this house, I'll then feel free. Right. And something was happening. And what I realize now is my perspective was changing. I could feel my perspective changing because what that question did for me, that simple question, was it flipped my perspective from being a destination into a feeling. It helped me realize that, oh, I don't need to wait. Like we said before about joy and happiness, I don't need to wait to feel free because I can access it today.
Welcome to Linda's Corner. My name is Linda Bjork, and today we're going to be talking about happiness and feeling free. I'm delighted to welcome Ryland Hormel. Ryland is a photographer, designer, storyteller, sociological artist, and the author of When Do You Feel Free? You can learn more about Ryland at his website, rylandhormel.com, and I'll include a link in the show notes. Welcome, Ryland. I'm so glad that you could join with me today.
Oh, it's so good to be here today with you, Linda. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I'm so excited to hear your story because a lot of us, when we're young, we have these ideals, we have these passions, things that we want to do. And then as we grow up, we kind of let those things slide and we get into a routine of making money and paying bills. And we just sort of forget. But you haven't done that. So would you mind kind of telling us a little bit about your story and how you follow your passions?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an amazing topic to talk about. And one of my passions is helping people unlock their passions. But for me, I think that started very early. I grew up in San Francisco in Haight-Ashbury. So this is the street where the 70s peace and love revolution happened, right? And so my childhood was walking up and down this street, and I just got exposed to so many different walks of life from an early age. And it really it surrounded me with ideas and perspective. And it just made this city that is actually a pretty small place. It's only 7 miles by 7 miles. But, a lot of people here. But that neighborhood, for some reason, it made this city feel a lot larger, right? I also have two parents that were both artists. My dad's a musician. My mom was an actress and then a makeup artist. And then when I was in middle school, started making jewelry. So she was always around the house being creative. And my dad would be downstairs playing his saxophone. And, they did other things outside of that. But it was really helpful for me to be exposed to creativity very early on and passion, right? And to see how, that is something that you could do in its entirety, but it's also something that can pair with, other things that you need to do in life to make ends meet. And so that really always, I guess, put this seed in me to look at life differently, to try to live in uncommon ways, I guess I would put it. But for me, my path was athletics. I was a soccer player my whole life. And that was my focus. Like that was my art form early on. And so I kind of progressed quickly with that. And when I was 18, I started getting recruited to play in college. And it was on one of those like recruiting, soccer tournaments where I ended up going up for a header and someone came up underneath me and I just landed flat on my back. A month goes by and I was in so much pain and I couldn't really operate the way I was used to. And I just kind of kept trying to push through it. And it got to a point where I had to go in and I ended up getting an MRI and I had a small fracture in my back. So I broke my back and it's this permanent fracture. So I had one of the top spinal doctors in San Francisco look at me at 18 years old after I had just about 2 weeks prior committed to go play at Connecticut College. And I had him look at me and tell me, you're probably never going to play soccer again. And I mean, as you can imagine, right, that was a pretty devastating moment for me. And he didn't really give me much of a pathway forward besides go sit on the couch and rest and start physical therapy. And so this was the first time in my life where I think I experienced depression, right? I was one of the most optimistic, positive, happy-go-lucky kids in the world. Like, no worries was what I would always say. No worries. It's all good, right? And I'll never forget, there was one night where I was sitting down in our kind of basement area on the couch playing video games, which was also something I never did, right? Like, my parents never allowed me to have video games growing up, but I think knowing that I was going through this traumatic period, it got introduced in my life. And my dad came downstairs and he just kind of pulled me aside and he looked at me and he said, I think you're going through some depression. And I was in such denial about it. I didn't have the tools or the knowledge or framework to identify what I was feeling too. And it was a pretty pivotal moment because it kind of opened up this new space for me to really see that I have to face something right now. Long story short, I ended up finding a chiropractor that more than anything, just instilled enthusiasm back into my life. He looked at me as soon as I walked in. He said, "Oh, you'll play again," right? Before he even did anything for my body, right? And that just kept growing and growing. I ended up going to college. I hadn't played in soccer in 6 months, and I decided just to go for it. I would play one day, sit out 5 days, and eventually I got my body back to a place of strength, and I ended up playing for 4 years. But it was my junior year where I remember watching a lot of my teammates kind of come back to visit who had already graduated, and they were working these jobs that they weren't really that passionate about, right? Like, you could see they just weren't like on fire like they used to be, because soccer was this, incredible passion. And knowing my limitations with my back and my body, I knew there was an expiration date to this journey. And just being someone that is driven by my passion, I needed to find something else, right? And that's where I kind of went back into creativity and looking at my parents and looking at, even though I never kind of chose a medium of art, we always had the art table growing up, and I was always, tinkering with clay or drawing or you name it, right? So I decided to kind of pick up a camera, and I'd been playing with some like GoPros and had always been curious about cameras growing up. And my mom let me take one of her old Nikon cameras, and it just kind of took off from there. And it like I fell in love with the camera and the way it helped me see the world differently. Everything became interesting. It's like, I think about I think skateboarders are some of the most creative people ever, because as soon as you start skateboarding, you never look at a sidewalk the same. You never look at stairs or a rail the same. The whole world opens up into this creative playground. And so the camera did something similar to me, where life just became more vibrant. My senses were heightened, and it just put me on this path of deciding to always try to pursue my passions and to try to fit that into both my work and my lifestyle.
Wow, Ryland, the story that you shared is so profound because it incorporates so many aspects, so many things that we need to kind of think about to make our passions match the real world. Because when you're young and everything is about soccer, oh, this is my life, this is my passion. And then to have a moment where that passion, your love, is taken away, and someone says, you will never do this again. Did it feel like just my life is over? I have no purpose. I have no love. And that the feelings of learning how to adapt to new circumstances, we can live and enjoy and be passionate and be happy as adults even if the passion and the thing that we're pursuing is maybe a little different than the things that we thought when we were young. So it doesn't mean that we all have to be astronauts or firemen or ballerinas or whatever the passion was, but we can still have the joy that we felt and that excitement that we felt about something. And those beautiful, wonderful feelings can be transferred to something else. It doesn't mean, okay, now I'm a grown up. Now I just have to pay bills and the fun is over. I mean, that finished, once I got out of college, now life is serious. It is that joy is available. And you kind of messed around until you found something that spoke to you. And how marvelous that you had such wonderful examples growing up of people who had that balance. And I think because you had seen that, you knew that it existed. For many people, they've never seen any other way than life is hard, life is a drudgery, life is a grind. And so they don't know that there's another way. So I appreciate so many aspects of you sharing today. And one is that you are maybe helping someone recognize for the first time, oh, do you mean that I can have joy and I can do things and I can still be a responsible adult? So thank you for sharing that. And I'm so glad that you had, a chiropractor and somebody who gave some hope back and said, you know what? You are going to play again. Your life is not over. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, no, and I love the way you just articulated that. And the word you used that kind of struck me the most was accessed, right? I think the more we can learn about joy, passion, we can then start to access it as a feeling, right? That I host these wellness retreats, surf, yoga, meditation a few times a year. And one of the workshops I teach, we call it designing your best day ever. And we have people write out, and it's after we do a series of other things that kind of start to, break up the energy and get people to think creatively about, what they're passionate about and what they could be doing. But we have people write down their day exactly a year from today. And the only rule is that you have to write and dream without the fear of failure, right? And you write from the very moment you wake up. You wake up, where are you? Who are you with? What do you see? What do you smell? You go to your kitchen, do you drink coffee or tea? And you just go through this day and you're just writing about just what is your best day ever? How do you want to be living your life? And the point of dreaming as big as you can and not feeling like anything is impossible is that, let's say you write down, I'm driving this $200,000 car. I have, 10 dogs or whatever it is, right? And I have this job that seems so far away, but it's what I want. The point of doing that is that upon reflecting on it, you realize everything you wrote down is just a material. And really what you're doing is that you're expressing and manifesting a feeling. And so I like what you said, Linda, because once you can start to inch your way closer to the feeling, you begin to see that, oh, this can show up in my life in a multitude of ways. It doesn't have to be this car. This car might just be an example of one thing that I think will give me that feeling, but maybe I can access it over here as well. And so that's why I love that exercise, is because it really just, it connects you more deeply with yourself through the way you want to feel in life versus the things you want to take from life.
Oh, I love that. Is this your Live Better retreats you're talking about?
Yeah, it is.
I like the title too, because I think the idea of living better and to be able to create this idea of this is my perfect day. This is what a wonderful day looks like. And I love that you included tiny little details like I get up out of bed and where am I and what am I smelling and what am I drinking and what am I eating and what makes it a perfect day. And we can have pleasure in small and simple things, and we can have joy in big things. And they can be different. If for someone, it might be 10 dogs. And for someone, it might be the $200,000 car. And for someone, it might be, that they woke up in a tent in the mountains and that they were doing some fun camping experience or whatever. And I love the idea that even as we think about and allow ourselves to imagine it, we can even feel the joy of that perfect day right now while I'm in the process of creating it. I don't have to wait for it to manifest before I can feel that joy, And if some of the things are my simple pleasures, like, oh, what did I eat for breakfast today? Hey, I had that today. I could have that tomorrow. Those simple pleasures I can have right now. So that even helps to bring things a little closer.
Yeah. And yeah, I just love this idea that we don't have to wait, right? That we have the ability to access it, but also I think I've been trying to reframe some of these things in terms of like joy, happiness, meaning, purpose, creativity as things that for so long I thought I had to like gain them, right? Okay, I'll do all these things and then I'll acquire them. But now I'm beginning to see them as something that they're already there. I just need to uncover it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I can, which still I have to have action to do that. But it's not like something I need to go grab. I like the idea of thinking of it. It's already here. It just has a weighted blanket over it. And I need to figure out how to rip that blanket off. And that's kind of the metaphor I use when we talk about like, if it's something to access, that means we already have it.
We already have it. So that perfect day that I'm imagining 1 year from today, I already have it. There's just a weighted blanket. And as soon as I uncover it, I'll be able to see it as well as feel it. But I can feel it today, which is so cool.
Yeah. And I think that concept really was one of the drivers behind the book I just worked on, around the topic of freedom, because I think freedom is very similar to joy, happiness, and, all of the other things we just talked about, where it's a feeling, it's something that can be accessed.
And because it is a feeling, we can have it now, or we cannot have it now. It doesn't require bars for me to feel trapped. It doesn't require, handcuffs for me to feel trapped. It could be my circumstances. It could be my relationship. It could be my financial situation. People feel trapped for a variety of reasons. And the feeling of freedom is very different and so hopeful and so, liberating. I mean, it just feels good. So as you were discovering and asking people about what makes you feel free, did you have I think part of what keeps us not feeling free is our comfort zone. We have a comfort zone that's supposed to help us feel safe, but in a way, it can actually keep us trapped. Did you find some things out about that, or?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think there's one thing that I think to be true about freedom. And I think outside of that, it's a pretty expansive space. But that one thing is that freedom needs a constraint to exist. And what I mean by that is that it's the breaking away from a constraint and or attachment that creates freedom.
Okay, that's deep. Go through it again and then walk me through it, because I'm not quite getting it.
Okay. So, yeah, I guess I'll skip ahead to the end of my book and to what I learned from working on this. And, I traveled across America and I interviewed over 100 people about freedom from all different walks of life and communities. And it was really a project about listening and learning about my own freedom through the perspectives of others. And when I look at all of these answers to that question that I collected, I see patterns start to emerge, right? And then there was this kind of like equation of freedom that I began to see. And so I'll just run through the equation and then I'll jump back to the beginning and break it down step by step, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So the equation starts: U minus constraint or attachment equals freedom. Freedom equals time and space. Time and space equals choice. Choice equals creativity. So let's go to the beginning. You minus constraint. So the reason I believe that freedom needs a constraint to exist is because we can think about these moments where we feel trapped or we're not able to fully express who we are, right? And we want to break away from that and do something else. One of the answers in my book that I just love the most came from, I think he must have been like a 12-year-old kid. And so the question is, when do you feel free? And he wrote, on Friday after school. And I was really impacted by that answer, because it just feels like something we can all relate to, right? It's like that moment, that bell rings, school's done for the week. You have the weekend, right? And you're free to do whatever you want. And so when we look at it that way, like school in that sense was the constraint. You break away from it, and now you're free to express yourself in a new way. And so I think our constraints can show up in many different forms. It can be a job. It can be a relationship. It could be just various attachments that we have. A lot of times it's in our own head too. It's like, what are the attachments we have to our emotions or our anxieties, and how much we are identifying as the anxiety versus just seeing that we're experiencing it. And it's not us, it's more just it's passing through us. And can we let that go and become free from it? So I see freedom as this, and that's why, so when I look at all of these answers I collected, there's 3 domains of freedom that I kind of see all of these kind of categorizing under. One of them is fear. So when we're scared to do something, I mean, the question that comes up is, what's on the other side of your fear? And it's usually this incredible feeling of freedom. You just broke away from that fear. You just jumped out of a plane and skydived, or you just got on stage and absolutely crushed a presentation that you were so nervous to do, but now you did it, right? I think facing our fears on the other side of it is this immense feeling of freedom. Another one of them is connectivity. So I see this as connection to other people and humans, and connection to nature. And those can be independent of one another, or they can happen side by side. But I just think about these times when, like even right now, talking to you, right? Like we are connecting, and all of the other things I have to do today, all of my other worries, anxieties, you name it, like they're not here right now because we're being present with one another. So you're helping me break away from that momentarily, and just to experience a feeling of freedom just through connection, right? I get that when I go drive. I'm in Sausalito in the Bay Area, and Mount Tamalpais is just in my backyard here. And it's one of my favorite places to go. And the moment I drive up there and start to get into nature, I just feel this kind of veil lift, and just all this weight and pressure start to fade away. And I just get this feeling of freedom. So connectivity, fear. And then the third one is flow state and creativity. So I think of this as any artistic and creative medium and passion, any activity such as surfing, biking, running, dancing, right? Just things that move energy around and just put us in a state of awareness and presence. And you can think about when you're at a concert, seeing live music, and something just hits you, and you are just so immersed in what's right in front of you that all of your attachments and constraints just pause for a moment. So I like to think of freedom as a feeling, as this kind of pause between our past and our future, which is just another way of saying presence, right?
So being in the present is freedom. So when people talk about mindfulness, people talk about living in the present, that is freedom.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, as you're listing your 3 different things, one of them, it sounds like freedom is a victory. It is a victory over fear. I have overcome something. So where are the constraints in the other two with the connectivity and with the creativity?
Yeah, so those aren't necessarily constraints as much as they are tools to help us break away from constraints.
Okay.
So
Help us
if
get away.
if we keep going through that equation, so U minus constraint, and so now we have to identify like what are our constraints or attachments. The question I use with myself is, what in my life do I feel is holding me back from expressing my true self? What is weighing me down from being the person I want to become? And, I think it takes time to sit with these questions and to really identify and be honest with ourselves what these constraints may be. But I think once we identify them, that's where I think we can go into these different domains of freedom that I learned from all of these answers I collected, and see these domains of fear, connection, flow state, and creativity as tools that can help us start to chip away at some of these constraints and move this energy around so that we can get closer to a state of awareness and clarity where we can then act on it. Because this is where that feeling of freedom, which I think we've all experienced, and that was why I was excited to work on this project, is that I think I do need to mention that there are, the way I see it, two sides of the coin of freedom. And one of them is this inherent state that we can access and experience that we've been talking about. But on the other side of it is this extrinsic side of freedom, where it's derivative. It's because of something. It could be a societal freedom. It's the freedom I get to experience in America as a white man that other people do not, right? And that side of freedom is not created equal, right? But I was really curious to find ways that we can show how freedom can connect humanity as opposed to divide it. And so I chose to focus on the inherent and the intrinsic side of freedom rather. And I think once we see how we can experience it as a feeling, we then, get hit with these jolts of freedom. We can break away from a constraint. I can have a long day at work and then go hop on my stand-up paddleboard and, go out in the ocean for an hour and just be completely immersed. But I get back and, life happens again. So that's where I see freedom also as neither a good or a bad thing. It's just something that opens up more time and space in our life. And so now we have a greater ability to choose. And that's where time and space leads to choice. And I think when we're able to design our life and create more freedom, and we provide ourselves with more choice, we then kind of see two different paths open up. We can either decide to not be disciplined and not honor that freedom and fall into old patterns and behaviors and start to cover that freedom and that time and space up with more constraints or attachments that may just be exactly the same thing, but in a different form, right? Maybe you quit your job, you're free from it, you enjoy that for a little bit, and then you get another job that you don't feel fulfilled by, and you just go back through that loop. Or you can see the path of creativity. And that's where this kind of equation ends. So time and space leads to choice. And I think since we're here on this podcast and it's about helping people grow and find happiness, joy, meaning, and purpose, let's say we choose the path of creativity, right?
Do that.
Yeah, right. I think we do that path. And this is where we can start to see that once we can uncover more freedom in our life, we now have an opportunity to move closer to our meaning and purpose. We have an opportunity to bring in more joy and happiness. But how do we do that? And I think it starts with willingness, right? Which will then turn into courage, right? I think courage is what we have to kind of muster up inside of us to move down this path of discomfort, right? It's not because we're the ones creating it, right? And someone else isn't designing it for us. So it takes a lot of courage. And it may not seem that way at first, but I think the further you go down living your truth, you start to get hit with a lot of resistance, and you have to have courage to keep pushing forward. And I think the thing that is able to sustain courage and sustain this openness and this ability to choose and to just sustain freedom is discipline.
And I love that you brought up discipline. And I was hoping to be able to come back to that and to talk about it a little more.
I would love to.
Because when we talk about freedom and you put in the equation that this is me minus my restraints, for some people, they might think, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to whatever. And yet it is our discipline that helps us to be free. And I'm sure you've heard the analogy of the kite string, how a kite flies free and wonderful, and it's held on by the string. And you might think, well, the string is a restraint. So if we cut it, then the kite will fly better. But it doesn't. It actually uses that string to help it fly high and fly straight. And if you cut it, it just flies around until it crashes to the ground. So I really appreciate that you've come back to that, because I think as people are searching for freedom, there is an imposter of freedom. And that is to just be kind of like a bowl of Jell-O where you just you're really going with the flow. You can just do nothing. Whereas you can have a feeling of freedom and have that discipline. And it's not a counterfeit. It's the real deal. So can you expound a little bit on that one?
Yeah. And I love that analogy of the kite. And this kind of goes back to what I said before around freedom is neither a good or a bad thing. I think at first it usually more times than not feels really good, but then it's just time and space. And that's where we can have the path of creativity or Jell-O, becoming Jell-O and just kind of floating by. It makes me think about this man I met at a barbershop in Santa Fe while I was working on my book. And I was getting my hair cut and he was listening to my project. He's like, "Oh, I'd love to be in it." So when I asked him the question, he was probably the quickest to answer the question and write it down on a note card. And he gave it to me and it just said single, and he underlined that. And below it, he wrote, "When I lost my first love." I was like, huh, that's interesting. Can you expand on that? He said, "Sure. I was an alcoholic and my wife would just get on me all the time about it, right? Trying to get me to change, trying to get me to improve and be healthier. And so the moment we broke up, I was free. I was free to do what I want. I was free to drink. But then I quickly regretted it. And it just really moved me. And it was kind of this first time where I started to see that, okay, freedom can be both good and bad, right? Because he chose the path of Jell-O, right? And yeah, it felt good for a moment, but that's fleeting. It's not absolute. And then he immediately began to regret his actions. And so does that make sense, right? Like that's where if we don't choose the path of creativity, which is where we start to act discipline, then we aren't taking control of our life. We're not holding ourselves accountable for our actions and I was thinking last night about Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, and like why I love logotherapy, which he designed so much, is that it just shows that no matter our circumstances, we can always choose the way we react to something, right? And I think this like extreme accountability, and then pairing that with discipline, it allows us to really move forward with our lives with a lot of just deliberately, really just being very intentional with the way we live. But discipline isn't always easy, right? That's getting up at 5 a.m. before the sun rises to go to the gym before work, or to meditate and just set your day up for success, even though when you're in bed, every voice, I mean, and I'm speaking about myself here. I'm not a morning person. Like I have an orchestra of voices in my head that's saying, keep sleeping. Right. And it's the discipline that you just, I think it's a muscle that's built too. The more you do it, the easier it gets. And it's kind of goes back to fear, right? It's like, what's on the other side of that, right? Like on the other side of getting out of bed when you don't want to is this beautiful feeling of freedom and openness and time and space to then do things that you feel like are going to fill your cup and fill your day and your life up in the way that you want to be living.
That is beautiful. And as we have the choice, and as you mentioned, the example of the gentleman that you met who felt like someone else was taking his choice, we have choice, and that makes us feel free. And then what we do with it is what can bring us joy or misery. There is accountability for our choices, and there's cause and there's effect. And so it's wonderful to have the freedom to make those choices. But then we are in turn accountable for the results. And so as we seek for freedom, this wonderful, wonderful feeling, there are ways we can use it that will help us to be happy. And there are ways that we can use it that can lead to misery. So as we're searching for this freedom, it's important to remember what that means. So is there anything else you want to make sure we cover before we close today?
No, I mean, I think just going back to that, the question of my book, when do you feel free? And what it did for me was the project really started when I spent 3 weeks documenting cowboys in New Mexico during the middle of COVID. And I needed to get out of the Bay Area. I needed a new perspective. I needed freedom, right? Like I was craving that. And they were the ones that, after a long day of working on the horse, they would, we'd be sitting around talking story, and they all said something about freedom, how, we don't make a lot of money doing this work, but we are free to do and live how we want, right? And so it planted this seed for me about exploring freedom and maybe doing a project around cowboys. And then someone asked me as I was kind of workshopping this concept, she asked me, she was my teacher at the time I was doing an MFA program. She just asked me, well, when do you feel free? And it was one of these moments in life where I had this like shockwave come through my body, and I could feel something happening. And this idea of freedom being this like fictional destination that is like a one-day type of achievement. Like once I have this relationship, once I have this type of job, I'm making this much money, I have this house, I'll then feel free, right? And something was happening. And what I realize now is my perspective was changing. I could feel my perspective changing, because what that question did for me, that simple question, was it flipped my perspective from being a destination into a feeling. It helped me realize that, I don't need to wait. Like we said before about joy and happiness, I don't need to wait to feel free, because I can access it today, right? And it was just such a magical moment that that's what inspired me to kind of keep asking more people that. And it was why I wanted to learn from others, is that feeling of my perspective being changed was so impactful. And I hadn't realized how guarded that I am. And I think a lot of us are, of our beliefs and our perspectives, that we don't really celebrate the moments when our perspectives are changed. We feel like maybe some shame around that. We feel the need to defend our perspectives, and we don't allow for enough openness to, which is, I think, growth, right? When our perspective is changed or amplified or enhanced, like we're growing, right? And so I just wanted to kind of end on this, is just celebrate these moments where we change our perspectives and be willing to open ourselves up to that. And a lot of times I think seeking out disconfirming information is one of the best ways to do it. And that's why I wanted to talk to people from every different community and walk of life that I could surround myself with. People that shared beliefs with me and people that had beliefs that were totally different from me, but the willingness to just listen to them and see maybe they had something to teach me and maybe they can help me grow and learn and change my perspective.
I love that. I love to be able to grow. And that growing does require that we open our minds a little bit and allow ourselves to maybe have a different perspective or to see something from another light. And the individuality of your question, when do you feel free? You're not defining what it is. You're gathering information and noticing patterns. Beautifully done, Ryland. Thank you for visiting with me today.
Thank you so much. So good to be here.
In closing, I'd like to share a quote from author Jack Canfield. He said, "True freedom is an inward state of being. Once it is attained, no situation in the world can bind one or limit one's freedom." Today, I invite our listeners to enjoy true freedom within and without. See you next time on Linda's Corner. Thanks for listening. Please share and subscribe to help us reach new listeners. And if you'd like to heal your life from the inside out, there is a free video series at hopeforhealingfoundation.org. Just click on the Free Stuff tab. I also invite you to grab a copy of one of my books, like Crushed, A Journey Through Depression, and You Got This, an action plan to calm fear, anxiety, worry, and stress. See you next time on Linda's Corner.